Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to take a stack of sources and, well, extract the absolute core of what's important for you.
Mhm.
And for this deep dive, we're plunging into the complex, vital, and frankly, often surprising relationship between two key South Asian neighbors, India and Bangladesh.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. We're working with this section from a text on international relations, a source that really zooms in on this specific dynamic.
Right.
Our goal is to guide you through the historical layers, look honestly at the persistent challenges, and highlight the areas of cooperation that define the ties between these two nations.
Okay.
By the end of this, you should have a clearer picture of the nuances and the key drivers that shape this crucial relationship.
Absolutely. Think of it as going from zero to well-informed on India-Bangladesh relations, guided by this one specific text. We're going to trace the story from their deep shared history and those initial, almost honeymoon-like days,
Yeah, those early days.
through decades of border disputes, really thorny water rights issues, the push and pull of trade, critical security concerns that affect both sides. And ultimately look at how recent high-level diplomatic visits have attempted to move things forward.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. It's a relationship woven with threads of history, geography, politics, and culture. And I found it absolutely fascinating seeing how many different aspects are covered in this material.
And understanding this specific relationship is vital for much more than just knowing about India and Bangladesh in isolation. It really is.
How so?
Well, it's fundamental to grasping the broader regional dynamics across South Asia, and it has significant implications for how the international community views and interacts with the subcontinent. It's, you could say, a cornerstone of regional stability and development.
All right, let's get started right at the beginning because as our source material makes clear, you simply cannot understand the present without grounding it in the past.
Absolutely essential.
The very foundation of this relationship is built on shared geography and culture. The text immediately highlights the incredibly close link between Bangladesh and India's West Bengal region.
That connection is profound. They share a common cultural heritage, ethnicity. It runs deep.
And language too, right?
Yes, a massive bridge connecting not just East India and Bangladesh, but also parts of Northeast India, is the Bengali language itself. It's spoken on both sides of the border and serves as this powerful cultural bond that persists despite political boundaries.
But despite that shared culture, this land has a history profoundly shaped by partitions. Not just one, interestingly, but three, according to the text we're using.
That's right, three distinct moments. The
Hmm.
first came much earlier than many might assume, way back in October 1905.
1905. What happened then?
That was the British colonial administration implementing what the source explicitly calls their divide and rule policy. They decided to partition the vast Bengal presidency.
And how did they do it? On what basis?
Along religious lines, that was the key, dividing the area primarily on Hindu-Muslim demographics. The territory that would much, much later become East Pakistan was carved out as a region with a Muslim majority based on this division.
And that move wasn't accepted quietly, was it?
Far from it. It triggered a significant wave of mobilization and widespread protests across Bengal. This movement became known as the Bangabanga Andolan, the anti-partition movement.
So people pushed back hard.
They did. The pressure was so intense and sustained that it actually forced the British to reverse the decision. The source points out that the territory was formally reunified on December 12, 1911.
So they put it back together. Problem solved. Seems like it should be.
Not entirely, and this is a critical point from the source. Despite the physical reunification, that initial decision to divide the land based on religion had already, sown seeds of division.
Oh.
The text argues that this experience, this act of partitioning based on religious identity, unfortunately contributed to setting the stage for future partitions, particularly as the national movement gained momentum and different communities began to articulate their aspirations, sometimes along religious lines.
Which brings us to the second major partition, and the one most people probably think of, 1947.
Exactly. The 1947 partition of British India into India and Pakistan. And here, the Muslim League, which had actually been established in Dhaka way back in 1906.
Right after that first partition attempt.
Exactly. The Muslim League played a pivotal role. Based on the two-nation theory and advocating for a separate homeland for Muslims in the subcontinent, the League strongly demanded that the Muslim-majority areas of Bengal become East Pakistan as part of the new nation of Pakistan.
And the creation of East Pakistan in 1947 was a deeply violent time.
It was incredibly tumultuous. The source reminds us of the large-scale communal riots that preceded this event in cities like Calcutta and Noakhali. It was a deeply painful and violent process for millions of people, marked by mass displacement and bloodshed. Just horrific.
So you have East Pakistan, created in 1947, separated by over 1,000 miles from West Pakistan, which was the seat of power. A very awkward arrangement geographically.
Much so.
And then came the third split in 1971, leading to the emergence of independent Bangladesh. The source details a number of key factors that built up and ultimately led to this final separation.
Yeah, post-1947, the people of East Pakistan felt increasingly marginalized and, frankly, exploited by the ruling elite in West Pakistan.
How so?
Well, the source highlights inadequate representation in the central government and significantly fewer resources being allocated to East Pakistan compared to its Western counterpart. There was a deep sense of economic and political disparity, a feeling of being treated like a colony almost.
And the language issue became a major defining flashpoint, isn't it?
Critically so. Despite Bengali being the language spoken by the vast majority of the population in East Pakistan.
Which is logical given the cultural background we discussed.
Exactly. But the West Pakistani regime tried to impose Urdu as the sole administrative language for all of Pakistan. This was seen as a direct assault on the cultural identity of the Bengali people. It led to widespread protests, confrontation, and ultimately violence. The Bengali language movement became this powerful force articulating the distinct identity and grievances of East Pakistan.
All of these simmering issues, the economic disparity, the political marginalization, the language conflict, they all came to a head around the 1970 general elections.
Yes, those elections were a turning point, a real watershed moment. The Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, which championed the rights and autonomy of East Pakistan, they won a landslide victory, secured a clear majority across all of Pakistan.
A democratic mandate.
A clear democratic mandate. However, the military regime in West Pakistan simply refused to recognize it. They refused to allow Sheikh Mujibur Rahman to form the government.
Just ignored the election results.
Pretty much. And instead, they unleashed a brutal crackdown and violence against the people of East Pakistan. Operation Searchlight, it was called.
And this domestic crisis didn't stay domestic for long.
It couldn't. The violence was horrific, and the resulting refugee crisis, millions fleeing into India, spilled over the border. And, as the source points out, Pakistan subsequently planned a preemptive military attack on India.
That changed everything for India.
It fundamentally changed India's calculus. It effectively forced India's hand, leading Delhi to respond militarily and, crucially, provide the decisive support that enabled the Mukti Bahini and the formation of independent Bangladesh.
Which culminated in victory in December 1971 and the birth of Bangladesh. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, often called Bangabandhu, the father of the nation, assumed power in the newly independent country, leading the government from 1971 until his tragic death in 1975.
And it's during this period, very early on in 1972, that India and Bangladesh signed a landmark document, the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation.
The foundation of the modern relationship.
The source emphasizes that this treaty became the bedrock, the foundational document for modern India-Bangladesh relations. It was meant to formalize the close ties forged during the Liberation War and set a path for future cooperation.
Okay, so the source has a really interesting case study focusing specifically on this period, asking if 1971 to 1975 was truly a honeymoon period. Sounds like it should have been right. Shared struggle, new nation.
You'd think so. And while acknowledging the general cordiality, it suggests that issues, some quite significant, did begin to emerge even then. It wasn't all smooth sailing.
What kind of issues?
Well, the Farakka Barrage issue is highlighted as a prime example of tensions bubbling up even during this phase of apparent closeness.
The Farakka Barrage. That comes up a lot.
It does. India had actually started constructing this barrage across the Ganga River, which flows from India into Bangladesh, where it becomes the Padma way back in 1951, long before Bangladesh even existed.
And the construction finished right in the middle of this supposed honeymoon in 1975.
Precisely. Talk about timing. India's stated reason for building the Farakka Barrage was primarily to divert water to flush out accumulated silt from the Bhagirathi-Hooghly River.
Okay, why was that necessary?
This was deemed necessary for ensuring the smooth navigability and operation of the Kolkata port, a significant economic hub for India. So, from India's perspective, it was about managing a waterway within its own territory for its own vital economic needs.
Makes sense from their side. But for Bangladesh, downstream, the perspective was quite different, I imagine.
Understandably so. The Ganga is a vital lifeline for Bangladesh, absolutely critical. So Bangladesh began to strongly assert that the Ganga is an international river, a shared resource,
Right.
and therefore any significant alteration to its flow, like that caused by the Farakka barrage, needed to be based on mutual agreement and consultation between both nations. They felt their rights as a downstream country were being impacted without their consent.
So even with a brand new Treaty of Friendship, you had this major point of contention over a shared river almost immediately.
Absolutely. The Joint River Commission, or JRC, had been established in 1972 precisely for negotiating water settlements for all the shared rivers. That was the idea.
The mechanism was there.
A mechanism was there. But despite it being in place, significant differences quickly arose over the allocation and fair weather flow of the Ganga, especially the amount of water India was diverting through the barrage during the dry season.
A crucial period.
Exactly. India maintained its right to divert water for flushing the Kolkata port, while Bangladesh voiced strong opposition to the perceived reduction in flow, creating these early friction points.
And the source mentions it wasn't solely about water either. Other things cropped up.
No, it wasn't just water. The source also points out that during this period, some disagreements began to surface regarding the settlement of issues and the division of assets following the 1971 war. Well, Bangladesh, for instance, alleged that it did not receive a fair share of the spoils of war, military equipment captured, things like that. While these were perhaps less existential than the water dispute, they added to the complexity and slightly strained the relationship, suggesting that the honeymoon wasn't entirely without its bumps.
And that initial period of closeness, bumps and all, came to a very abrupt and tragic end.
It did. The assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman on August 15, 1975, is clearly cited in the source as the pivotal event that brought the initial honeymoon period of India-Bangladesh relations to a close. His leadership was so deeply intertwined with that early, cordial phase.
A huge shock. So with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's assassination, Bangladesh entered a period of intense political instability. What happened to the political landscape then, and how did that impact the relationship with India?
Yeah, the source describes a really turbulent time immediately following 1975. It was marked by a series of political upheavals, including a coup and then a counter-coup, a lot of uncertainty.
Like a chaotic period.
Very chaotic. Out of this instability, Ziaur Rahman eventually came to power, becoming the 7th president of Bangladesh in 1977.
And his approach to India seems to have been a departure from Mujibur Rahman's, according to the source.
That's a key shift highlighted. Ziaur Rahman is described as not being favorably disposed towards India, a cooler stance, perhaps.
And how did that manifest?
Well, one of his significant actions, which immediately amplified tensions, was taking the Farakka barrage issue, that unresolved point of friction we just discussed, to the United Nations General Assembly, the UNGA.
Taking a bilateral river dispute to the global stage. Wow. What was the international reaction?
The UNGA, while acknowledging the issue, basically urged both nations to resolve it through bilateral means, through direct negotiations between India and Bangladesh, rather than internationalizing it further. Keep it between yourselves, essentially.
But the act itself sent a message.
Oh, definitely. The very act of Bangladesh taking the issue to the UNGA, as the source makes clear, was perceived by India as an unfriendly act and created further tension in an already cooling relationship. It signaled a very different approach to engaging with India compared to the Mujib era.
Interestingly, there was also a change of government in India around this time, wasn't there?
Yes, timing again. In 1977, Indira Gandhi's Congress government was replaced by the Janata Party government in India. A big political shift there, too.
Did the new Indian government try to mend fences?
They did attempt to try and repair the fractured relationship with Bangladesh that had emerged post-1975. There was an effort.
And they specifically tried to tackle the Farakka issue again, bilaterally.
They did. Babu Jagjivan Ram, representing the new Indian government, visited Bangladesh in 1977, and they signed an accord in November of that year specifically aimed at resolving the Farakka issue. So there was a diplomatic effort to find a bilateral solution, kind of following the UNGA's suggestion.
But the source notes that while they tried to address Farakka, other issues continued to fester and act as irritants. It wasn't just Farakka anymore.
Exactly. Fixing Farakka, or trying to, didn't solve everything.
What were some of these other simmering problems that didn't go away?
Well, a major one that the source immediately brings up, and one that becomes a really persistent challenge throughout the decades, is the border issue, specifically concerning illegal immigration.
Ah, the immigration issue.
Yes. The text explains that historically, due to population pressure and a lack of sufficient habitable and arable land within Bangladesh,
Geographic realities.
right, there has been a movement of people across the border into India, particularly into areas like the Brahmaputra Valley and Assam and other parts of the Northeast.
And how does India view this movement?
India's perspective, as described in the source, is that this movement constitutes illegal immigration into Indian territory. This difference in perspective, is it historical migration driven by necessity, or is it illegal encroachment, has made it a significant and continuous point of friction in bilateral relations. Very sensitive.
The source also traces how the relationship continued to fluctuate under different Indian leaders. It dipped again when Indira Gandhi returned to power in 1980.
Correct. Back to a cooler phase, perhaps. However, the relationship saw some improvement during the tenure of Rajiv Gandhi as Prime Minister of India. He made efforts to address some of the outstanding issues and inject some positive momentum.
What were some of his key initiatives regarding Bangladesh? What did he try to do?
Rajiv Gandhi oversaw the conclusion of a Memorandum of Understanding, MU, on water issues in 1982, trying to get back to talking about water cooperatively.
Yeah.
Later in 1985, they signed the Nassau Accord, which included another MOU specifically on water that was valid for 3 years, and recognizing the complexity of shared rivers.
Which is immense.
Immense, yes. They also established a Joint Commission of Experts, JCE, whose mandate was to explore alternative plans for water sharing and look into ways to augment the waters in the shared Ganga-Brahmaputra river basin, thinking bigger picture.
And there was even an attempt to bring in another country into the water discussions. That sounds complex.
Yes, the source notes that Rajiv Gandhi was willing to allow Nepal to be included in discussions related to water sharing from the basin, Nepal being another key upstream nation. The source says it was essentially trying to sweeten the entire deal by broadening the framework.
A regional approach.
Yeah.
But despite these diplomatic efforts, these Melgus and commissions, they didn't fully resolve the issues.
The source indicates that these pacts and initiatives, while well-intentioned, face domestic constraints within India, internal political hurdles or implementation challenges.
Domestic politics again.
Always a factor. These constraints prevented them from yielding the fully desired results or resolving the issues completely. So, while efforts were made at the leadership level, implementation challenges or internal opposition in India limited their impact. The period until the end of the Cold War remained one characterized by fluctuating relations, influenced by leadership changes and these persistent underlying issues.
The end of the Cold War era also coincides with a significant shift in Bangladesh's domestic political landscape, as you mentioned earlier.
It does. That period saw the stepping down of the military dictator Hussein Mohammad Ershad and the return to democratic elections in Bangladesh in 1991.
And in those 1991 elections, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, won.
That's right. BNP came to power.
This is where the source highlights a crucial dynamic that seems to continue to shape the relationship even today.
Absolutely. The source emphasizes that since the end of the Cold War, the trajectory and tenor of India-Bangladesh relations are primarily driven by the policy orientations of the two major political parties in Bangladesh, the Awami League and the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP. Who's in power in Dhaka matters hugely.
Okay, break that down. What's the key difference in their orientation towards India, according to this source?
Well, the BNP, led by Begum Khalida Zia, is characterized in the source as tending to incline its policies to favor countries like Pakistan and China, countries which have historically had complex or rivalrous relationships with India.
So, a bit more distant from India.
Often, though not always, there is a degree of suspicion or distance in the BNP's approach to India, a more nationalist stance, perhaps.
While the Awami League, under Sheikh Hasina, how is their approach described?
The Awami League, conversely, is described as favoring a partnership and closer ties with India. Their political platform is often more explicitly pro-India, rooted in that shared history of the Liberation War and secular ideals.
So a fundamentally different starting point.
A fundamentally different starting point. And this difference in the ruling party's stance in Dhaka has a direct and significant impact on the warmth, the depth, and the cooperative spirit of the bilateral relationship at any given time. It's a key variable.
The source provides a case study specifically on anti-India fault lines, which seems to connect the BNP's orientation directly to domestic political strategy in Bangladesh.
It does, and this is a really insightful point from the source. It notes that the BNP is not favorably disposed towards India and at times expresses suspicion. A striking example is given in 1991, around the time of Ershad's fall and the lead up to the elections.
The ones the BNP won.
Exactly. Khalida Zia, then leading the BNP, organized and led a Faraka march.
Focused on the contentious water issue for Raqqa again.
Exactly. This march was explicitly aimed at mobilizing public support against perceived Indian interference, specifically highlighting the Faraka issue to tap into nationalist sentiments and grievances about water sharing.
A political mobilization tactic.
Precisely. And the source points out that she succeeded in forming the government in those 1991 elections, illustrating quite starkly how these anti-India fault lines' existing sentiments of caution, suspicion, or grievance towards India can be strategically exploited in Bangladesh's domestic politics to garner public support and political power.
So this isn't just about foreign policy differences between parties. It's deeply embedded in how political parties campaign and build their base within Bangladesh. How does this dynamic of exploiting anti-India sentiment domestically actually impact the day-to-day bilateral relationship on the ground?
Well, it creates a fundamental volatility in the relationship, you see. When a party like the BNP is in power, even constructive proposals from India might be viewed with suspicion or framed domestically as potential interference.
Making progress difficult.
Much slower or even impossible. The domestic political incentive can sometimes be to maintain a degree of distance or even tension with India rather than resolving issues collaboratively because that stance resonates with a certain segment of the electorate. Conversely, when the Awami League is in power, there's generally greater political will and, you could argue, public space for cooperation. This leads to more positive engagement and a higher chance of resolving long-standing disputes.
Like the Ganga Treaty in '96.
Exactly. The Faraka March case study is a powerful illustration. The issue isn't just a technical water dispute, it's also a tool in the domestic political arena. And that really complicates finding a stable, long-term solution, regardless of the technical merits or demerits of any proposal.
That really adds a layer of understanding. It's not just country-to-country foreign policy, but the heavy influence of internal political competition. Okay, let's move on to some of the persistent, ongoing issues that the source highlights, starting with that border issue and illegal immigration, which we touched on earlier.
Yes, the source revisits this, reiterating that the movement of people across the border is largely driven by the demographic and land pressures within Bangladesh itself. People seeking habitable and arable land, moving into areas like India's Brahmaputra Valley.
Driven by necessity, from one perspective.
From one perspective, yes. But India's unwavering perception of this as illegal immigration into its territory remains a continuous and significant point of friction. It's a really complex humanitarian issue, intertwined with sovereignty and security concerns on India's side. A tough knot to untangle.
We saw how the relationship fluctuated under different Indian governments. After Rajiv Gandhi's tenure, the source notes that the period leading up to the end of the Cold War continued to see these ups and downs.
Correct. Never quite stable. And then, with the return of democracy in Bangladesh in 1991, the policy orientation of the ruling party became the dominant factor shaping the relationship, as we discussed. The BNP won in '91, leading to a cooling of ties. But then, the Awami League replaced the BNP in power after the 1996 elections.
And the Awami League's return coincided with a major breakthrough on a key river issue.
Precisely. Under the Awami League government in 1996, India and Bangladesh were able to conclude a fresh treaty specifically concerning the sharing of Ganga river water.
After all the controversy over Faraka.
Yes, and the source highlights this as the only major success to date from that joint river commission that was established way back in 1972 to manage all the shared rivers.
Just the Ganga Treaty.
Just the Ganga Treaty is cited as the major success. This underscores the point that political will, particularly from the Bangladeshi side with a pro-cooperation government, is crucial for resolving these difficult issues. The source explicitly states that since the end of the Cold War, the relationship is primarily driven by whether the BNP, with its perceived pro-Pakistan-China inclination, or the Awami League, with its pro-India partnership orientation, is in power in Dhaka.
Okay. Beyond these broad political dynamics and historical issues, the source delves into specific dimensions of the relationship. Let's look at defense diplomacy. India, from its perspective, views Bangladesh as a potential defense market, right? Wants to sell equipment.
That's one perspective mentioned, yes. India sees an opportunity there. However, the source points out that in recent years, Bangladesh has shown a preference for importing its arms and defense equipment from other major global suppliers.
What are they buying from?
It specifically mentions the U.S., Russia, and China. It even notes the potential for China to supply submarines to Bangladesh in the future, suggesting India hasn't fully captured that market despite proximity.
Interesting. But The source highlights a unique role Bangladesh plays that is viewed positively by India from a security standpoint. What's
Yeah,
that?
this is quite intriguing. Bangladesh is a leading global contributor to UN peacekeeping missions, UNPKM. Huge participation.
Okay, and how does India view that?
Well, the source outlines a dominant theory within India regarding this. This theory posits that the more the Bangladeshi armed forces are engaged in UNPKM duties abroad,
Keeping them busy internationally.
right, the less likely they are to be idle or tempted to interfere in domestic politics back home or become a security threat to India. Essentially, active participation in international peacekeeping is seen as contributing to domestic stability in Bangladesh and reducing its potential to become a hostile actor towards India, unlike the relationship dynamics India has historically had with Pakistan's military.
That's a really interesting strategic perspective. So supporting Bangladesh's role in global peacekeeping aligns with India's own security interests in having a stable, non-threatening neighbor.
According to this theory presented in the source, yes, it's seen as a stabilizing factor. The source also adds that India firmly supports the full evolution of Bangladesh as a democracy, free from military intervention.
Avoiding past patterns seen elsewhere.
Exactly, drawing parallels to countries like Turkey and Indonesia, where the military has historically played an outsized political role. This democratic development in Bangladesh is viewed by India as a positive for regional stability and for the bilateral relationship itself.
And beyond these broader strategic points, there are concrete military engagements happening.
Definitely. The source mentions regular joint Army and Navy exercises between the two countries. These build interoperability and, crucially, trust between the military establishments.
Practical cooperation.
Yes. They also signed an extradition treaty in 2013, which is very important for security cooperation, dealing with criminals and insurgents crossing the border. And notably, during Sheikh Hasina's visit to India in 2017, which we'll discuss in more detail later, a new defense cooperation framework was concluded. So, the defense relationship is active.
Okay, let's shift gears to commercial diplomacy. The source paints a picture of Bangladesh as primarily an agrarian economy, but with significant demand for imported goods, and India as a crucial trading partner.
That's the basic economic backdrop, and India has actively sought to facilitate trade by providing significant concessions, trying to help Bangladesh's economy.
How so?
The source highlights that India offers duty-free, quota-free access for almost all Bangladeshi exports to the Indian market. That's a major concession, designed to help Bangladesh boost its export sector and reduce the trade imbalance between the two.
However, despite that concession, the trade balance isn't even, is it?
No, the source explicitly notes that the trade balance is heavily tilted in favor of India. India exports considerably more to Bangladesh than it imports from Bangladesh.
Right.
Beyond trade, India is also a significant source of economic assistance. It provides lines of credit and developmental aid. For instance, the source points to a $1 billion USD credit line provided in 2012, with an additional $200 million specifically earmarked for infrastructure development in Bangladesh.
And Indian businesses are setting up shop in Bangladesh.
Yes, the source mentions significant investments by Indian firms. Tata, for example, proposed a substantial $3 billion USD steel plant at one point. Indian companies are also involved in power generation, linking power grids between the two countries, and developing telecom and transport infrastructure. This indicates growing economic integration and cross-border investment.
But the source suggests that these steps towards deeper economic integration aren't always met with straightforward acceptance in Bangladesh. There's some hesitation.
This is a subtle but important point raised. The source notes that India's steps to integrate the Bangladeshi economy through investment and infrastructure linking can sometimes be perceived with suspicion by Bangladesh.
And suspicion of what? Being overwhelmed.
Possibly. Despite the potential economic benefits, there can be an underlying concern about India's economic dominance or Bangladesh becoming overly reliant on its much larger neighbor. A sensitivity about sovereignty, perhaps.
And a key example of this strategic caution is Bangladesh's stance on transit for India's northeast states, right? That keeps coming up.
Absolutely. The source highlights Bangladesh's steadfast refusal over many years to grant India overland transit access through its territory to connect mainland India with India's northeastern states.
Which are geographically somewhat isolated.
Very much so. And transit through Bangladesh would be the most direct route. This is a point of debate, as the source suggests that granting such transit could have potentially benefited both countries by significantly reducing logistics costs and boosting trade between Bangladesh and the northeast region.
Seems logical economically.
Economically, yes. Yet Bangladesh has consistently declined, which likely stems from a strategic calculation or perception related to sovereignty, security, or maybe maintaining economic autonomy.
So even with duty-free access for their goods, billions in credit lines, and Indian investment coming in, there's still this layer of suspicion or strategic caution on Bangladesh's side that prevents potentially mutually beneficial projects like transit from happening easily. How does this perception versus reality play out?
It's complex. From India's perspective, these commercial initiatives, market access, aid, investment, even transit proposals, are framed as beneficial development partnerships. They're aimed at helping Bangladesh's economy grow and fostering regional connectivity, which India sees as good for everyone.
Okay.
However, the source suggests that from Bangladesh's internal viewpoint, particularly influenced by those anti-India fault lines we discussed earlier, which can be amplified by certain political actors.
Right, the domestic politics angle.
There's a counter-narrative, or at least a cautious approach. The suspicion might stem from a historical legacy of unequal relationships, concerns about becoming economically dependent on a much larger neighbor, or simply a desire to maintain sovereign control over key strategic assets like transit routes.
So it's not just economics.
It's not just economics. This difference in perception means that economic logic alone isn't always enough to drive cooperation forward. The political framing, the historical context, and the underlying trust levels significantly impact whether initiatives are embraced or resisted. It's a constant balancing act between potential mutual gain and perceived strategic risks or political sensitivities.
That's a really crucial distinction. It's not just about the economic numbers on paper, but how they're interpreted through a political and historical lens within Bangladesh. Okay, now let's turn to a long-standing, incredibly complex issue that, almost against the odds, saw significant resolution. The Land Boundary Agreement, or LBA issue,
yeah.
the enclaves.
Yes. This is a fascinating case study in protracted negotiation and eventual resolution. Really shows what's possible. It dates back to the very moment of partition in 1947. Sir Cyril Radcliffe was tasked with drawing the boundary line between India and East Pakistan.
A rush job by many accounts.
Very rushed. And in the process, he inadvertently created these peculiar land parcels called enclaves, bits of India inside East Pakistan and bits of East Pakistan inside India.
And the source includes a quirky historical detail about their origin before partition.
It does. It's quite strange. It notes that in the pre-independence era, these were known as chip mahals. And apparently they were used by local Rajas, specifically the Raja of Cooch Behar and the Maharaja of Rangpur, as stakes and chess games.
Seriously. Land and people as chess pieces.
That's what the source says. Imagine chunks of land and the people living on them being wagered in a board game. A very strange legacy that created decades and decades of hardship for the people actually living there.
So after 1947, these enclaves ended up marooned on the wrong side of the new international border. Indian territory inside Bangladesh and Bangladeshi territory inside India. Cut off.
Completely cut off. And early efforts were made to sort this out even before Bangladesh existed.
When was that?
Even back in 1958, India's Prime Minister Nehru attempted to resolve some of these issues with Feroz Khan Noon, who was the Prime Minister of Pakistan then. Remember, East Pakistan was part of Pakistan.
The Nehru-Noon Agreement?
Yes. It proposed dividing certain territories. Under this agreement, India was supposed to get the enclaves of Dahagram and Angarpota, while half of another enclave called Burubari was designated to go to East Pakistan.
What was the specific complication with Burubari? Why only half?
Well, the source explains that Radcliffe, in his hurried demarcation based on Thanas or police station areas, accidentally omitted the Burubari number 12 entirely from the maps. It was just missed.
An oversight.
A significant oversight. The Nehru-Noon Agreement sought to rectify this. Since Thana 12 was actually part of the larger Jalpaigudi than in India, they agreed to give half of it to East Pakistan based on their claims related to population or contiguity, resolving the omission.
And to implement even this early agreement from 1958, India had to take a significant constitutional step, didn't it?
That's right. To legally give effect to the Nehru-Noon Agreement and actually transfer Indian territory, even that half of Burubari, India had to amend its constitution. Sovereignty is serious business.
Which amendment was that?
This was done through the Ninth Amendment Act of 1960 under Article 368, which outlines the process for constitutional amendments in India. It shows the high legal and political bar set for any territorial adjustments, even back then.
Then came 1971 and the creation of Bangladesh, a new country, a new relationship with India. A new opportunity arose to tackle this enclave mess.
Exactly. With the emergence of a friendly Bangladesh, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and Mujibur Rahman decided in 1974 to try and tackle all the pending border disputes comprehensively, including this festering enclave issue.
This led to the design of the 1974 Land Boundary Agreement, the LBA.
Yes, this agreement finally clarified the sheer scale of the problem and laid out the proposed solution. It identified 111 Indian enclaves situated within Bangladesh and 51 Bangladeshi enclaves situated within India. Quite a complex map.
And the solution was basically a swap.
The core idea was a territorial exchange, yes. India would get the Bangladeshi enclaves located within its territory, and Bangladesh would get the Indian enclaves located within its territory. Clean up the map.
And what were the living conditions like for the people stuck in these enclaves during all these decades of limbo?
The source paints a really stark picture. It states that the citizens living in these enclaves had virtually no access to basic rights or facilities, not from the country they were geographically located in, nor from the country they legally belonged to on paper.
Stateless, effectively?
Effectively stateless people living in administrative limbo. Unable to access healthcare, education, electricity, or even proper law enforcement, their situation was incredibly precarious and miserable for generations, a real human tragedy.
The 1974 LBA was signed by Mujib and Indira Gandhi, but it wasn't ratified by India initially. Why the delay? Why did it take so long?
That's a crucial point. The agreement was signed on May 16, 1974, but India did not ratify it domestically at that time. The source attributes this delay, which stretched on for decades, almost 40 years, to strong internal resistance within India. There were political objections, public sentiment against ceding any Indian territory, even as part of an exchange that would also bring in other territory and solve the problem for the enclave dwellers. This lack of ratification prevented the actual exchange of enclaves from happening. The agreement sat on the shelf.
What were the specific terms outlined in that 1974 LBA for key areas like Dahgram, Angarpota, and Barubari, which were mentioned in the earlier Nehru-Noon Pact?
Okay, under the terms of the 1974 LBA, Bangladesh was finally supposed to receive the Dahgram and Angarpota enclaves, which were Bangladeshi territories surrounded by India. In return, India was to receive the other half of the Barubari enclave, the half that had originally been allocated to East Pakistan under Nehru-Noon, but maybe hadn't been fully transferred or demarcated.
And since Dahgram and Angarpota would be Bangladeshi territory surrounded by India, how were the people living there supposed to get to the rest of Bangladesh?
Good question. The agreement stipulated the provision of a corridor, a narrow strip of Indian land called the Tin-Biha Corridor. India was supposed to lease this corridor to Bangladesh in perpetuity forever to allow access for the residents of Dahgram and Angarpota to reach the main part of Bangladesh.
A lifeline corridor. But even granting access to this specific corridor faced delays due to that internal resistance in India you mentioned.
Significant delays. The source notes that due to that strong internal resistance in India, full, unrestricted access to the Tin-Biha corridor was not immediately granted after 1974, even though the LBA was signed.
When did they get access?
It was only in 1992, almost 2 decades later, that limited access was finally granted. And even then, it was only for specific hours of the day, not 204/7 access. Full, round-the-clock access wasn't finally granted until 2011, still facing hurdles.
This issue dragged on for over 40 years. Incredibly complex. What developments under the Sheikh Hasina government in Bangladesh finally paved the way for the eventual resolution? Things started moving again.
Yes, Sheikh Hasina's government, after coming back to power, initiated a key process around 2007. They established a consultative mechanism specifically for the people living in these LBA areas, the enclave dwellers themselves.
Actually talking to the people affected.
A crucial step, because it directly engaged with the affected populations, heard their views after decades of being ignored.
And what did that consultation reveal? What did the people want?
It brought a critical human element right to the forefront. The people living in these enclaves, after decades of being effectively stateless and living in such difficult conditions, made it overwhelmingly clear they did not want to be forcibly relocated based on the original territorial exchange plan in the 1974 LBA.
They didn't want to move, even to their home country.
No. They asserted their right to remain in the areas they had lived in for generations, where their homes and communities were. The source notes that the rights and wishes of these people came into stark incongruence with the original LBA precept of territorial relocations. The original plan wouldn't work for the people.
So the resolution had to pivot, had to change to accommodate the people's wishes. The human factor became central.
Exactly. The focus shifted dramatically. When Sheikh Hasina visited India in 2010, this human dimension was central to the discussions between her and the India leadership. This led to the agreement on a protocol to the LBA in 2011.
Okay, what was the core change in this 2011 protocol? How did it fix the problem?
The protocol fundamentally altered the approach. Instead of a simple land swap that would force thousands of people to uproot their lives and move.
Which they didn't want to do.
Right. It was decided that the status quo on the ground would be maintained regarding the location of the residents, and critically, their wishes would be respected.
How would that work practically?
It meant that residents of Indian enclaves inside Bangladesh could choose to become Bangladeshi citizens and stay where they were, and their land would then officially become part of Bangladesh.
And vice versa. For residents of Bangladeshi enclaves inside India, they could choose Indian citizenship and stay put, with their land becoming part of India.
So the border moved, not the people.
Essentially, yes. The territorial exchange happened not by moving people, but by adjusting the border based on the residents' choice of nationality and where they lived. There was effectively no longer a physical cession of populated territory in the traditional politically sensitive sense, but an exchange based on resident self-determination, a much more humane solution. This procedural acceptance on the ground happened in 2011 with the protocol. What was the final step needed in India?
With this revised approach agreed upon, which addressed the concerns about forced relocation and framed the exchange differently, the path was finally cleared for India's parliament to ratify the original 1974 LBA and its crucial 2011 protocol.
The constitutional requirement.
Yes. This monumental step, requiring a constitutional amendment in India, finally happened in May 2016. Unanimous support in Parliament, remarkably.
And after all those decades, the process was finally completed.
Yes. The entire complex process of resolving the land boundary and enclave issue, which had been a source of friction and immense human hardship for over 6 decades, was officially completed by June 2016. It stands as a major achievement for both governments.
Truly remarkable.
And a powerful example of how even the most entrenched historical disputes can be resolved with persistent effort, political will from both sides, and importantly, a focus on the human impact. Respecting the wishes of the people was the key that unlocked this decades-old resolution.
It really is quite something that such a long-standing, difficult issue was finally put to rest. Okay, moving from land boundaries to sea boundaries. The source also discusses maritime and security issues, including another significant dispute that went to international arbitration.
That's right. Maritime cooperation and boundary delimitation talks between India and Bangladesh actually date back to 1974 as well. Similar time frame to the LBA.
Another long-running issue.
Yes. Over the years, they held 8 rounds of talks trying to draw the maritime boundary in the Bay of Bengal. But by 2009, they still hadn't reached a full agreement, particularly regarding the area around a small, uninhabited island called New Moor Island, or South Talpati, as Bangladesh called it.
And like the Farakka issue going to the UNGA years earlier, Bangladesh decided to take this maritime dispute to an international body when bilateral talks failed.
Correct. The failure of bilateral negotiations led Bangladesh to approach the Permanent Court of Arbitration, based in The Hague, under the provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, in 2009.
What's UNCLOS?
UNCLOS is essentially the international legal framework governing all maritime activities and boundaries. The Constitution for the Oceans, some call it. Bangladesh sought formal arbitration to delimit the maritime boundary with India.
So it went before a tribunal,
Yeah.
an international court.
Yes, a 5-member arbitration tribunal was constituted under Annex 7 of the UNCLOS Convention, specifically to handle the delimitation of the maritime boundary between the two countries. The tribunal heard arguments from both sides, reviewed the evidence, and delivered its final decision on July 7, 2014.
Okay. What were the key findings of the arbitration award? Who got what?
The award had several significant outcomes. It upheld Indian sovereignty over the disputed New Moor Islands, which was a point in India's favor. It also ensured India's continued access to the Harahanga River estuary.
But what about Bangladesh? What did they gain?
Crucially for Bangladesh, the tribunal granted Bangladesh access to a substantial additional area of its exclusive economic zone, or EEZ, a full 19,000 square kilometers more than they might have gotten otherwise.
What does that mean in practical terms? What's an EEZ?
An EEZ is an area extending 200 nautical miles from a country's coastline, where that coastal state has special sovereign rights over the exploration and use of marine resources. Think fish, oil, natural gas. It's hugely important economically.
So Bangladesh got a larger share of the potential resource pie.
A significantly larger share. India retained its rights over its continental shelf, and Bangladesh was also allowed an outlet to the extended continental shelf beyond 200 miles. But most importantly, the award granted Bangladesh unimpeded access to the open sea.
What do you mean unimpeded? Were they blocked before?
Prior to this arbitration, due to the unresolved boundaries and overlapping claims from India and Myanmar, Bangladesh's access to its full EEZ and international waters was constrained. It was effectively sea-locked in a practical sense, even though it has a coastline. The tribunal's decision resolved this ambiguity, granting Bangladesh vital, clear access to exploit its marine resources and engage freely in maritime trade and activities.
This seems like a major positive step then. Resolving a potentially volatile issue through international law, rather than letting tensions escalate. It clarifies resource rights and access for both nations.
It absolutely is a significant resolution. Resolving maritime boundaries is critical for national sovereignty, resource management, who gets the fish, the gas fishing rights, navigation routes, and strategic security.
And doing it peacefully is key.
Crucially, the fact that this was achieved through peaceful arbitration under UNCLS, with both sides accepting the outcome, is really a model for dispute resolution in the region and globally. It removed a significant point of potential future conflict and provided the legal clarity that enables both countries to develop their maritime economies and secure their waters more effectively. A win for international law.
While the maritime boundary issue found resolution through arbitration, turning back to the rivers, the source highlights the Teesta River issue as a key, persistent irritant that remains unresolved, unlike the maritime boundary.
Yes, the Teesta. This is arguably the most prominent, outstanding river dispute between the two countries today. And remember, Bangladesh shares a remarkable 54 out of its 57 transboundary rivers with India. Water is everywhere in this relationship.
54 rivers. That's incredible.
It is, and the Teesta is a major river for Bangladesh. The source says it's the fourth largest after the combined flow of the Ganga, which becomes the Padma in Bangladesh, the Brahmaputra, Jamuna in Bangladesh, and the Meghna. Its floodplain covers a huge area, 2,750 square kilometers in Bangladesh, illustrating its critical importance for agriculture, livelihoods, and the environment downstream.
The Joint River Commission, established way back in 1972, was supposed to manage all these shared rivers, right?
Yes, its mandate was precisely that, to ensure equitable sharing of resources for all 54 rivers. That was the hope.
But it hasn't quite lived up to that hope.
Well, as the source notes, the only major success it has achieved in its decades of existence is that 1996 Ganga Water Sharing Agreement, which itself is only valid for 30 years, so it will need renegotiation eventually. The Teesta dispute, despite repeated efforts and high-level discussions, has remained unresolved and continues to be a major point of contention, a real thorn in the side.
The Teesta originates in India, correct? In the Himalayas.
That's right. It originates from the Kangxi Glacier high up in Sikkim, flows down through the state of West Bengal in India, and then crosses the border into northern Bangladesh before eventually draining into the Brahmaputra-Jamuna River, which then flows into the Bay of Bengal.
There have been proposals and attempts to reach a water-sharing agreement for the Teesta before, haven't there? It's not like they haven't tried.
Oh yes, there have been several attempts. An ad hoc agreement was reached way back in 1983, proposing a division where India would get 39% of the water, Bangladesh 36%, with a significant chunk, 25%, left unallocated. But that was just ad hoc.
And more recently.
More recently, in 2011, a comprehensive proposed interim agreement was developed. It was supposed to last for 15 years and provide some predictability.
What were the terms of that 2011 proposal? How would the water be shared?
The 2011 proposal suggested a specific sharing formula, particularly for the crucial dry season, which runs roughly from December to March when water scarcity is most acute. It proposed that India would receive 42.5% of the Teesta's dry season flow, and Bangladesh would receive 37.5%.
A defined split.
A defined split, yes. The proposal also included technical measures like establishing a joint hydro observation station to monitor water flow accurately and transparently. It looked like a done deal almost.
So why did this proposed agreement, which seemed quite detailed and was agreed upon at the highest levels, fail to be adopted? What went wrong?
The source explicitly states the reason. The 2011 proposed agreement could not be finalized and adopted due to strong opposition from the Chief Minister of West Bengal, Mamata Banerjee.
Ah, West Bengal again. Like with Farakka's impact.
Exactly. Since the Teesta flows through West Bengal before entering Bangladesh, and water management is constitutionally a state subject in India, the state government's agreement, or at least its lack of outright opposition, is effectively necessary for the central government in Delhi to sign such a treaty with Bangladesh.
And that state-level buy-in wasn't there.
It was not obtained in 2011. The West Bengal government argued the proposed share for Bangladesh would harm farmers and the state's own irrigation needs. Thus, the issue remained unresolved up to the point of the source's latest information in 2017, and it continues to be a major point of contention today.
What's the fundamental problem driving the dispute, especially in that critical dry season?
The core issue revolves around the use of barrages by both countries for irrigation. There's a significant barrage at Gajuldaba in West Bengal, India, and another one downstream at Dalia in Bangladesh. Both countries use these barrages to divert Teesta water for their vital agricultural needs.
And in the dry season.
During the dry season, when the overall flow of the river is naturally low, upstream withdrawals at Gajuldaba in India significantly reduce the amount of water flow reaching Bangladesh downstream. This impacts irrigation, navigation, fisheries, and ecosystems in northern Bangladesh quite severely.
What does Bangladesh want?
Bangladesh has consistently argued for and demanded a 50% share of the Teesta waters, feeling that their downstream dependency and historical usage warrants an equal share, especially during the lean season. They feel the current situation is inequitable.
Have there been any potential technical or hydrological solutions discussed beyond just arguing over percentages?
The source mentions that hydrological experts have often proposed a major, ambitious link canal project. The idea is to connect rivers like Manas, Ganga, Teesta, and Sankosh, potentially augmenting water availability across the entire basin during dry periods.
A big engineering solution.
A very big, complex, and expensive one. But despite the existence of such technical proposals, the political deadlock over the sharing formula, particularly the crucial opposition from West Bengal, means the Teesta issue remains politically unresolved. The technical solutions can't overcome the political hurdles. The Teesta dispute really underscores the immense challenge of managing transboundary rivers, doesn't it? Especially in a region like South Asia with high population density and huge agricultural dependence on water.
Absolutely.
For Bangladesh, as a downstream nation sharing those 54 rivers with India, predictable and adequate water flow is not just an economic issue. It's seen as a matter of national security and economic survival. Any project or withdrawal upstream in India, even if intended for India's domestic use like irrigation or hydropower, has a direct and often immediate impact downstream.
It's inherently interconnected.
Completely. So resolving the Teesta isn't just a technical negotiation about cubic feet per second of water. It's a deeply political and sensitive issue touching livelihoods, regional development aspirations, and fundamental trust between the two countries. It highlights why water remains one of the most complex and potentially volatile shared resources globally, and particularly in South Asia.
Absolutely. It illustrates that constant need for negotiation and compromise over shared natural resources, a challenge that is clearly ongoing. Okay, let's move on to another dimension the source covers: energy security diplomacy. The source mentions a promising proposal from way back in 1997.
Yes, back in 1997, a Bangladeshi firm called Mahana Holdings put forward a proposal for supplying natural gas from the Sitwe fields, which are located in South Myanmar, to India.
Okay, gas from Myanmar to India. Where does Bangladesh fit in?
The proposed route for the gas pipeline was through Bangladesh. Bangladesh was the transit country. Ah, okay. This sounds like a classic example of a potential win-win-win regional energy cooperation project. Myanmar sells gas, India gets energy, Bangladesh gets transit fees, and maybe some gas too. Did they reach an agreement?
Progress was definitely made. In 2005, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and India actually reached an agreement in principle for Myanmar to supply a significant amount of gas, about 90 tons cubic feet mentioned in the source, using this proposed pipeline route via Bangladesh. It appeared to be a positive step forward for regional energy connectivity and security.
But this project didn't come to fruition, did it? Something went wrong.
No, it fell through. The source states that the Khalida Zia government, the BNP government, which was in power in Bangladesh at the time.
The party described as less inclined towards India.
Right. That government backed out of the agreement. Their stated reason for withdrawal, according to the source, was that India was not allowing Bangladesh reciprocal access to hydropower generated in Bhutan and Nepal that would transit through India. So they linked the gas pipeline project with completely unrelated energy issues involving other countries, Bhutan and Nepal.
That's what the source suggests. Bangladesh appeared to use its strategic position as the potential transit country for the Myanmar-India gas pipeline as leverage, trying to gain concessions from India on separate energy access issues related to Bhutan and Nepal.
A negotiating tactic that backfired.
Seems so. This linking of unrelated issues, while perhaps intended as a negotiating tactic, ultimately derailed the entire gas pipeline project.
What was the consequence of Bangladesh withdrawing from the agreement? Where did the gas go?
As a direct consequence of the project being stalled due to Bangladesh backing out, Myanmar eventually signed a deal to supply that same gas to China instead. A pipeline was constructed from Kyaukri Port on Myanmar's coast overland to Rui City in China's Yunnan province.
So China got the gas.
China got the gas. A potentially significant regional energy project benefiting India and Bangladesh was redirected, arguably due to bilateral political considerations and linkages being made.
Has there been any attempt to revisit this idea since then, with a different government in Bangladesh?
The source notes that since Sheikh Hasina's Awami League government returned to power around 2015, negotiations regarding this kind of gas transit project have reportedly begun anew.
So the door might be open again.
It might be. This again highlights how the policy orientation of the ruling party in Bangladesh can reopen or close doors on potential areas of cooperation like energy transit.
This example really shows how potentially beneficial regional energy projects can get tangled up in unrelated bilateral issues and leverage dynamics, potentially leading to missed opportunities for all the original parties involved.
It absolutely does. Transit, whether it's for energy pipelines, roads, railways, or even digital connectivity, is a valuable strategic asset for the country providing it.
Gives them leverage.
It does. And countries through which transit passes often seek to leverage that position to gain benefits in other, sometimes unrelated areas. The Myanmar-India-Bangladesh gas pipeline case is a clear illustration of how linking a specific transit project to entirely separate bilateral or even trilateral issues can cause the entire project to collapse, potentially leaving all the original parties worse off compared to the original proposal.
A cautionary tale.
It underscores the challenge of finding ways to compartmentalize, to isolate specific areas of cooperation from broader political disputes, although that's often the ideal rather than the reality in these complex international relationships.
Another critical area the source discusses, shifting tone here, which has very severe implications, is the rise of radicalization in Bangladesh.
Yes, the source addresses this sensitive issue. It notes that Bangladesh's vulnerability as a potential hub for terror activities is not entirely new, but it has increased significantly since the global events of 9/11 and the rise of transnational groups.
Even though Bangladesh is officially secular.
Yes, although Bangladesh is constitutionally defined as a secular republic, the source points to external influences at play that are trying to change that character.
What kind of external influences does the source mention specifically?
The text specifically points to Islamic NGOs, charities, and other organizations receiving funding and support from certain foreign nations and actively promoting more rigid conservative ideologies like Wahhabism within Bangladesh.
And it mentions Pakistan's role.
It does. The source states quite directly that Pakistan's intelligence agencies have links with many of these types of NGOs operating in Bangladesh, and that these links are sometimes used to foster anti-India sentiment or even support groups targeting India.
And this seems to be connected to how religion is used in politics within Bangladesh itself.
Yes, the source highlights that since the 1990s, religion has been increasingly utilized as a political tool or card in Bangladesh, often by various parties to mobilize support and garner power.
Creating an opening.
Exactly. This political environment, where religious sentiment is a significant factor in public life, can unfortunately provide fertile ground and a degree of political cover for more radical elements to operate and recruit.
Are global terror groups actually present in Bangladesh, according to the source?
The source indicates a growing presence of both al-Qaeda affiliates and ISIS sympathizers or elements within Bangladesh. It cites specific incidents such as the horrific terror attacks staged by ISIS sympathizers at the Holy Artisan Bakery in Dhaka in July 2016 during the Eid period as evidence of this presence and capability.
What constraints does the source say the current Bangladeshi government, the Awami League government, faces in taking strong action against radicalization? Why can't they just stamp it out?
It's politically difficult. The source notes that the present Bangladeshi government faces a significant political compulsion, a kind of tightrope walk, regarding taking decisive action against all radical elements.
Why is that?
This is because the opposition parties in Bangladesh, particularly the BNP and its allies like Jamaat Islami, could potentially exploit any crackdown. If the government is seen as cracking down too hard on religious groups, even extremist ones, the opposition might try to portray it as an attack on Islam itself, risking a severe backlash among certain segments of the population. This political calculation can constrain the government's ability or willingness to act forcefully against all forms of extremism.
A difficult balancing act. And there seems to be a pattern of targeting specific individuals associated with liberal or secular viewpoints within Bangladesh.
Yes. The source mentions a disturbing and systematic pattern of targeting rationalists, atheists, secular bloggers, academics, and even foreigners within Bangladesh by radical elements. These attacks are often brutal, carried out with machetes, and clearly intended to silence dissenting or secular voices and create fear.
The source states that the implications of this rise in radicalization are very severe for India.
That's what the source emphasizes repeatedly. It poses a direct and serious security threat to India. Well, the source provides a specific example. The discovery of bombs and bomb-making materials in Burdwan, West Bengal in 2014, not 2015, as I might have misstated earlier, apologies. These were linked to a Bangladeshi militant group, Jamaat-ul-Mujahideen Bangladesh, JMB, and highlighted the cross-border movement of extremists and materials.
A direct spillover.
A direct spillover. For India, the situation is described as particularly worrisome because groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, or their affiliates and sympathizers, are effectively at its very doorstep, operating in a neighboring country with which India shares a long, porous, and sometimes difficult-to-manage border. As the source lays it out, this combination is dangerous. External influences promoting extremist ideologies, the use of religion and domestic politics providing cover, the actual presence of global terror networks or their local affiliates, and the specific targeting of liberal voices. It creates a complex and volatile security landscape in Bangladesh. And for India, this isn't just a domestic issue for its neighbor. It represents a direct and proximate threat. Because of the potential for extremist elements to cross the border, established networks in India recruit or launch attacks from Bangladeshi territory. The Burdwan incident is cited as a tangible manifestation of this cross-border risk.
So counterterrorism cooperation is vital.
Absolutely critical. Managing this shared security challenge and fostering effective counterterrorism cooperation is a crucial and ongoing dimension of the India-Bangladesh relationship. It highlights how internal dynamics in one country can have immediate and severe implications for the security of its neighbors.
It certainly adds a very serious layer to the security discussions between the two nations. Okay, one more river issue discussed in the source. The proposed Tipimuk Dam.
Yeah.
Another dam? Another potential point of contention.
Yes, this is another example of the challenges around shared rivers, specifically the Barak-Meghna river system this time. The Joint River Commission, back in 1978, was tasked with exploring the possibility of constructing a dam on the Barak River.
What was the primary motivation for proposing this particular dam? Why build it?
The main reason put forward for proposing the Tipimuk Dam was to address the significant and regular flooding that occurs in the Barak River Basin, particularly affecting parts of Assam and Manipur in India, and also downstream areas in Bangladesh. Flood control was a major goal.
Where exactly was it proposed?
The proposed location for the dam is at the junction of three northeastern states of India, Mizoram, Assam, and Manipur, right near the border with Bangladesh.
And was flood control the only intended use, or were there other benefits planned?
No, the source also notes that the project envisioned using the stored water for irrigation purposes as well, benefiting agriculture in the surrounding areas of northeast India. And hydropower generation was also a key component.
But like other river projects upstream, Bangladesh has raised concerns about the Tipimuk Dam.
They have. Unsurprisingly, Bangladesh's concerns mirror those raised in other river disputes like Farakka and Teesta. They argue that the proposed dam will negatively affect the water supply downstream in Bangladesh, in the Surma and Kushiara rivers, which are branches of the Barak, and reduce the flow of water, particularly during the crucial dry summer months.
Same pattern. Upstream development, downstream fears.
It's that persistent upstream-downstream dynamic playing out again. An upstream development project aimed at solving problems like flooding or generating power in India is viewed with apprehension by the downstream neighbor, Bangladesh, which is concerned about reduced water availability for its own needs.
What are the specifics of the proposed dam project? How big is it?
It's proposed as a large-scale project, a 1,500 milliW hydroelectric dam. The source also mentions that Manipur, being the state where the dam would be physically located, is expected to receive 15% of the generated electricity free of cost, providing a direct economic incentive for the host state to support the project.
So another river, another dam, another set of concerns for Bangladesh downstream. It really highlights that managing these numerous shared water resources is a continuous, complex negotiation between these two countries. We see similar dynamics of upstream development versus downstream impact with Tipamuk, as we saw with Tista and Faraka.
Precisely. While the specific details of each river and project differ, the Barak for flood control, irrigation, and power, the Ganga primarily for flushing Kolkata port, the Tista mainly for irrigation, the underlying challenge is remarkably consistent. How do countries sharing a river basin balance their respective developmental needs, their water demands for agriculture and industry, and their environmental concerns, especially when actions taken upstream directly impact the downstream neighbor?
A constant balancing act.
It reinforces the idea that effective, transparent, and mutually agreed upon mechanisms for managing all the shared rivers, perhaps through a basin-wide approach rather than river by river, are essential for fostering long-term trust and stability in the relationship. The Tiptimuk issue is just one more example, albeit a significant one, of this ongoing challenge.
Let's shift now from some of these persistent challenges to look at more recent, high-level diplomatic engagements. Let's see how they've attempted to address some of these issues and build cooperation, particularly in the last decade or so. We'll start with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Bangladesh in 2015.
Yes, this visit was widely seen as very significant, aimed at resetting and strengthening ties early in his tenure. A key moment highlighted in the source is the Indian Prime Minister paying homage at the National Martyrs Memorial in Savar, near Dhaka, which commemorates those who died in the 1971 Liberation War.
Symbolism matters.
That gesture was highly symbolic, recognizing and honoring the shared history and the sacrifices made during Bangladesh's War of Independence, where India played that crucial supporting role. It set a positive tone.
And a major focus of the visit was enhancing connectivity, wasn't it? Addressing that issue.
Absolutely. Connectivity was a big theme. To improve bilateral and sub-regional connectivity, new bus services were unveiled and routes inaugurated. For example, connecting Kolkata in India with Dhaka and Agartala in India's northeast via Bangladesh, and also a direct bus service from Dhaka to Guwahati in Assam.
Concrete steps.
Very concrete steps towards improving people-to-people links and trade movement, addressing the connectivity bottleneck in a practical way.
And crucially, the visit marked the formal exchange of the Land Boundary Agreement instruments, the final step.
Yes, this was perhaps the most tangible and historic achievement of the visit after those decades of delay and complex negotiation we discussed.
The chess piece is finally settled.
Exactly. The exchange of the ratified LBA instruments formally completed the process of resolving the complex land boundary and enclave issues. It was the culmination of years of diplomatic effort by both sides and a major confidence-building measure, a huge deliverable.
Beyond the LBA, a wide range of other agreements were reached during that 2015 visit.
Yes, a comprehensive list of 22 agreements was agreed upon during the visit, covering a broad spectrum of sectors. A particularly notable one was on coastal shipping.
What did that allow?
This agreement allows Indian merchant vessels to use key Bangladeshi ports like Chittagong and Mangla for shipping goods to and from Bangladesh, and potentially even for transshipment to India's northeast, offering an alternative to land routes.
This coastal shipping agreement seems strategically important then, perhaps offering an alternative or supplement to those tricky overland transit issues.
It could be. It provides a direct maritime route for trade, potentially bypassing some of the political sensitivities around land transit through Bangladesh, and offering a potentially more efficient way to move certain types of goods between the two countries, especially to and from the northeast.
What else is covered?
The visit also included discussions on broader cooperation on regional waters, with a focus on the blue economy, sustainable use of ocean resources, and expanding maritime collaboration in general. Economic assistance was also a major component. India extended a fresh $2 billion USD line of credit, specifically for health infrastructure and education projects in Bangladesh.
And support in the energy sector was also part of the package, continuing cooperation there.
Yes, India agreed to provide support for the construction of additional power grids within Bangladesh and committed to supplying 100 MW of electricity from Tripura, an Indian state bordering Bangladesh, adding to existing power supplies. This addressed Bangladesh's growing energy needs and enhanced cross-border energy connectivity.
The persistent issue of the trade deficit, tilted heavily toward India, was also addressed. How?
It was. To help address this imbalance, India committed to establishing a dedicated Indian economic zone within Bangladesh. The explicit purpose of this zone, as stated, was for manufacturing units located there to produce goods primarily for export back to India.
Creating a pathway for Bangladeshi goods into India.
Exactly, creating specific opportunities for Bangladeshi manufacturers to access the large Indian market more easily and help reduce that bilateral trade deficit over time.
And did Bangladesh reciprocate by offering specific zones for India?
Yes, Bangladesh decided to offer special economic zones, SEZs, to India at designated locations like Mangala and Burmara. These zones would provide a dedicated space and facilities for Indian businesses to invest and operate within Bangladesh, further facilitating Indian investment and economic cooperation. The 2015 visit really demonstrates a clear strategic push by both countries, particularly with the Modi government in India and the Hasina government in Bangladesh, to build a stronger, more pragmatic partnership.
Moving beyond rhetoric.
Absolutely. The final resolution of the LBA after so many decades, the concrete steps on connectivity through new bus routes and coastal shipping, the significant financial assistance package, and these specific initiatives like the Indian Economic Zone in Bangladesh and offering SEZs for Indian investment, they all directly targeted key areas of friction or opportunity identified in the relationship. From historical border issues to current trade imbalances and infrastructure gaps, it represented a very tangible effort to translate positive political will into practical cooperation on the ground.
Following that significant visit in 2015, Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina paid a state visit to India in 2017, continuing the momentum.
Yes, this visit also began by reaffirming that deep historical link, highlighting the connection forged in 1971. Another very poignant gesture was Sheikh Hasina presenting citations to the families of Indian soldiers who lost their lives supporting the Bangladesh Liberation War, honoring the sacrifices made by India nearly half a century earlier.
Connecting back to the foundation. And India extended further support for Bangladesh's war veterans, the Mukti Jodhas.
Yes, under India's existing Mukti Jodha scholarship scheme, which provides support to veterans and their families, India decided during this visit to extend medical treatment facilities to an additional 100 Bangladeshi Mukti Jodhas in Indian hospitals, a specific humanitarian initiative recognizing their contribution to that shared history.
Cooperation was deepened across several critical areas during this 2017 visit as well.
Yes, bilateral cooperation in defense and connectivity was a major focus again, building on the 2015 talks. They agreed to further strengthen defense cooperation, specifically emphasizing joint efforts to combat terrorism.
Linking back to those security concerns about radicalization.
Exactly, making that link explicit. They also decided to enhance cooperation in tackling cross-border crime, including human trafficking, drug smuggling, and the trade in illegal narcotics across their shared border. Practical security measures.
India also reiterated its commitment to supporting Bangladesh's overall development.
Absolutely. India reaffirmed its commitment to contribute to Bangladesh's developmental efforts, offering assistance in areas like skill development for the workforce, energy sector cooperation, infrastructure development projects, and the adoption of high technology, a broad development partnership.
What was the status of the long-standing Teesta issue during this 2017 visit? Any breakthrough?
Unfortunately, no. The source notes that as of the 2017 visit, neither side had achieved success in concluding the Teesta Water Sharing Agreement. It remained unresolved. The political deadlock persisted.
Still stuck?
Still stuck. However, both leaders did decide to enhance cooperation towards finding an early conclusion, acknowledging it as a persistent challenge that needed continued focus despite the positive trajectory of the overall relationship. Kicking the can down the road, perhaps, but keeping it on the agenda.
Military-to-military ties saw a specific focus during this visit, building on previous efforts.
Yes, there was a clear thrust towards enhancing the military-to-military relationship. A comprehensive defense cooperation framework was formally concluded during the visit, outlining areas for future collaboration.
And institutional links were strengthened.
Yes. To foster strategic understanding and professional exchanges among military leaders from both countries, a specific Memorandum of Understanding, MO, was signed between the prestigious Defense Services Staff College in Wellington, Tamil Nadu, India, and the National Defense College in Dhaka, Bangladesh, building those institutional connections.
Beyond defense, a wide array of other MOUs were signed, reflecting the breadth of the cooperation being discussed.
The range was really extensive. MOUs were signed covering areas like the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and cooperation in outer space technology, signaling partnership in advanced technological fields.
Quite high tech.
Indeed. They also agreed to jointly regulate border huts. Those are traditional local markets set up right on the border to facilitate local trade and to cooperate in cybersecurity, judicial cooperation, helping each other with legal matters, earth science research, mass media collaboration, audiovisual co-production like films or TV shows, and facilitating smoother passenger traffic across the border.
A very broad agenda. And further financial assistance was provided by India.
Yes, India extended an additional line of credit to Bangladesh during this visit, building on the significant credit line provided back in 2015, keeping the development assistance flowing. India also committed to specific health infrastructure development on the ground, agreeing to establish 36 community clinics across Bangladesh to improve primary healthcare access.
The sheer volume and variety of agreements reached during both the 2015 and 2017 visits are striking, aren't they?
Yeah.
It really demonstrates the multifaceted nature of the relationship and a deliberate effort, at least during this period, to build cooperation across almost every conceivable sector, from hard security and high tech to cultural exchange and local community development.
It absolutely does. It underscores the strategic importance both countries place on the relationship, especially when you have aligned governments like Modi's in India and Hasina's Awami League in Bangladesh. While those persistent, difficult challenges like the Teesta dispute remain stubbornly on the agenda.
They don't just disappear.
No, they don't. But the extensive range of agreements actually signed, the significant financial commitments made by India, and the clear focus on improving connectivity, security cooperation, and development partnership illustrate a strong political will during this period to deepen the relationship and address issues through engagement, even as the shadow of domestic politics and historical sensitivities continues to shape the landscape.
So let's try to bring all these different threads together now. We've gone from that deep shared history and multiple partitions through the political shifts and the persistent disputes like water sharing and border management, touched on serious security concerns like radicalization, and then look at these periods of intense diplomatic engagement and cooperation, particularly in recent years under certain governments. How does all of this history and these diverse dynamics shape the overall relationship between India and Bangladesh today, as portrayed in our source?
Well, it creates a relationship defined by a real dynamic push and pull. It's not static. There are periods and aspects rooted in deep friendship, and that powerful historical connection from 1971 fostering strong cooperation on many fronts.
Like the LBA resolution?
Exactly. But these exist right alongside persistent tensions and unresolved issues like Teesta, creating moments of friction, suspicion, and political difficulty. It's a relationship that rarely stands still. It's constantly being navigated.
And it seems undeniable, based on the source, that the internal political landscape within Bangladesh, particularly the differing orientations of the Awami League and the BNP towards India, acts as a major determinant of whether the relationship is currently in a phase of greater cooperation or increased tension.
That's a central insight highlighted repeatedly by the source material we're looking at. The ruling party's policy orientation in Dhaka has a very direct impact on the warmth of ties, the political willingness to negotiate difficult issues like water or transit, and even the public perception of India within Bangladesh. This internal political dynamic in Bangladesh is perhaps one of the most significant factors influencing the day-to-day health of the bilateral relationship.
It's also clear that resolving those sensitive, long-standing issues, particularly water sharing on rivers like the Teesta, and managing aspects of border security and migration, even after the success of the LBA and the maritime boundary, arbitration remains crucial for ensuring long-term stability and building deeper, more resilient trust between the two nations.
Absolutely. Issues like the Teesta dispute aren't just technical problems about water flow. They become political symbols. They represent fairness, equity, and respect in the relationship. They can sour the overall atmosphere and act as bottlenecks, preventing broader cooperation in other areas. Making progress on these difficult, politically charged issues is essential for sustaining positive momentum in the relationship over the long haul.
So, for you, our listener, why does the state of India-Bangladesh relations ultimately matter? Why should you care about this complex dynamic between two neighbors?
Well, it matters on multiple levels. For regional stability in South Asia, it's absolutely central. A strong, cooperative relationship between these two large countries can foster much-needed economic integration, improve vital transport connectivity across the eastern subcontinent, and enhance security cooperation against shared threats throughout the entire region.
And economically.
The trade dynamics, the investment flows, the infrastructure projects these directly impact economic opportunities, not just within India and Bangladesh, but also in neighboring countries like Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar. And the shared security concerns, particularly regarding issues like counterterrorism, managing radicalization, and cross-border crime, have implications that definitely extend beyond their own borders. Understanding this relationship provides essential context for anyone interested in the geopolitical and economic dynamics shaping modern South Asia.
Okay, so to summarize this deep dive, based on our source material, we've explored a relationship that was forged in the shared fire of the 1971 Liberation War, a moment of deep bonding. But it has since been constantly navigating through complex historical legacies, internal political rivalries, persistent resource disputes, and evolving global and regional dynamics.
Yeah, and we've seen significant progress in certain areas, notably the hard-won resolution of the land boundary agreement and the peaceful settlement of the maritime boundary through international arbitration. These really demonstrate that even the most entrenched and complex historical issues can be successfully resolved with sufficient political will, creative diplomacy, and appropriate mechanisms. It's not impossible.
Yet, we also have to acknowledge the persistent challenges that remain major obstacles, particularly the unresolved Teesta water dispute, which continues to be a source of significant friction, and those very serious security concerns related to the rise of radicalization in the region and its potential cross-border implications.
And ultimately, the trajectory of the relationship, its ups and downs, remains heavily influenced by both political will at the highest levels and those complex domestic factors within both countries. With the policy orientation of the ruling party in Bangladesh often playing a particularly visible role in shaping the immediate dynamic with India.
So, as you reflect on this complex picture we've painted from the source, here's a thought to leave you with. Considering the deep historical roots, the experience of multiple, often traumatic partitions, and the ongoing influence of domestic political rivalries within both India and Bangladesh, how might those internal priorities and political compulsions continue to shape and potentially shift the direction of this vital bilateral relationship in the coming years? How much is driven by internal needs versus external partnership?
Or perhaps looking at the sheer number of shared rivers, those 54 rivers flowing between them, will finding a resolution to a major bottleneck like the Teesta issue actually pave the way for a new era? Could it unlock more comprehensive, perhaps basin-wide water management cooperation across the other shared river systems? Or will each river remain a separate, potentially contested negotiation tackled piecemeal depending on the political climate? Which path will they take on water?
Both are really crucial questions for the future of this incredibly important relationship. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating and complex ties between India and Bangladesh. We hope you feel a little better informed about this critical regional dynamic.